everywhere, like everywhere, and they have all these type of customs and beliefs, and it's if you ever go and try to talk reason to any one of them, you cannot talk them down from the roof. It is so entrenched in their very being. Like this is the way reality is. I mean, there's no two ways to discuss that. And even though you think that that doesn't exist here in the West, there's a lot of subtle. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many very educated people still have these subtle tendencies to fall prey to superstition. And I'll give you some examples. Like um, sometimes people think that there's a bad number, so they're gonna avoid it, right? Number 13. Uh, Even though you might not believe that walking underneath a ladder is bad, then like, oh, I walked underneath a ladder, or a black cat crossed my path. Right? These are things that you see in cartoons, but they have a basis. Like people recognize that. One of the things you actually might see a lot of times at work is like knock on wood, right? Like you say something, they say like knock on wood, so that you don't basically something good happens. They don't want that ni'mah to go away, and so they say that. And actually, I was reading in this one art. It was a BBC article about the evil eye, and how it was pretty ubiquitous, the evil eye, this concept of an evil eye across cultures, but how that even plays out in the modern day, like workforce, where when something happens, people sort of shy away from. It's like this reflex. So someone made a really great thing on a particular IT project, and they're like, "Oh, did you do that?" He's like, "No, it wasn't just me. It was us as a team." And it's not like he's trying to be humble. They just feel like if they say it, then something's going to happen and it's going to go away. Like, why do you think that? It's not like they have a direct concept of evil eye, but people are very, sometimes very cagey, right? So, oh, what did you get in your SATs? Oh, it was okay. No, but what did you get? It went okay. Why don't you want to say it? Because they feel like if I open that up, somehow I'm exposed, and somehow some force is going to come and take it away. It's very primal. It's very primal. It's not very well defined, but it has to do with some very paganistic tendencies that exist, primal paganistic tendencies that exist within individuals. And what's another very good example of this is astrology, horoscopes, or people like that this is my, I don't know, what do you call them, like Gemini and Taurus, what do you call that? Zodiacs, right? And it's a big thing, like on the dating scene, right? Like, what's your sign? It's like almost a pickup line, that what's your sign? Because people still feel like somehow these things factor into it, and obviously, in Hindu tradition, it's a big deal, like astrology, and that actually factors into finding your spouse and so many making decisions and all that. And it doesn't matter. These are people who are like, Mayo trained. They're coming here, but they don't drop that. It's still sort of, deeply entrenched. Um, Reading the horoscopes, like if you really didn't have that type of draw, like why is it in your Sunday paper? Right? I mean, you could say, yeah, it's just for amusement, but maybe not. Like, I mean, why do you get those little, what do you call that, little scrolls in your Chinese crackers when, those fortune cookies when you go to the Chinese restaurants? So people read that and they're like, whoa, how did they know that about me? Because everyone is in the same situation as you. That's why, like, you write like really vague stuff. It's like someone listens to that song, like, my God, that's exactly what me and Rohma are going through. Yes, and every other like couple in the same zip code, right? It's not specific for you. That's why they were designed. I mean, the songs were written that way because they had wide appeal. It's art reflecting reality. So horoscopes, and all of these things are not allowed in our deen. why did the deen stop you from doing it? Sometimes people say, hey, it's just having good-natured fun. But it's actually super dangerous. It's super dangerous because these type of tendencies are what eventually lead to, it's very close to the heart, and then it gets very close to the aqidah of an individual, like your belief system. And when a person starts to form a very strong belief system, I already told you, it's very hard to deconstruct. If you ever sit and talk to these type of people, they might be cagey about it and not let you know what they really feel about that, but inside they're sort of afraid about it. But once it's there, it's sort of there. And if you let it progress, that's where a lot of these that's where deviant sects come from sometimes. That's where, what's that called? The occult sometimes rises from. And you gotta think that some of these people who, this is the same tendency of people who think like God talks to them. Right? They get like super, I shouldn't use the word Sufi, but for lack of a better word, like become super Sufi about everything, right? That like normal occurrences in life, but then they start ascribing supernatural meaning. falling into this obscuritious and abject extremist devotions. You see, for example, like there was this one guy who started doing puja from COVID came, and they it's actually very graphic, but he actually, as a literally cut their own tongue, and it's like bleeding out, as an offering to God to take COVID away from the world, because somehow that's so sincere and devotion. I love humanity so much. It was a bloodbath. Right? It was a bloodbath. Now, the what's it called? The paramedics got there in time, and they were able to save the individual. You don't even have to go very far. Forget about other religions. Look at the matam that the Shia do. If you actually, like, they have these gatherings where they get together in like these big houses, and they type of attitude. Do this or should I not do this? So I'm going to cast divination with arrows. So I'm going to cast arrows. If the arrow comes out this way, then I should do this. If I should do this, I won't do this. It's sort of like, rolling dice. And, but there's a feeling, it's not just rolling dice and we're just going to do it. It's a feeling that there's some supernatural power that's coming through this that's actually guiding me to make a decision, right? So it's like, if you flip a coin, I'm not saying you can't flip a coin. It's this idea that somehow, like when I flipped in his heads, it was God telling me, or whatever, some power telling me that example, if Saad, or some person named Saad, where's Saad? Saad comes into the room, I said, MashaAllah, happiness has come into the gathering. It's permissible, right? Inshallah, and Allah, inshallah, you take the opinion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put barakah into the gathering. So it tells us, it's teaching us how to think at a certain level. And what happens when a person like casts arrows and divinations, they're also relinquishing agency in their life. Right? You're too chicken to make real decisions. And you have to of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is involved with everything, but part of being an agent of change and sound footing in life is the ability to take action and to take responsibility for the consequences of those actions, whether they be positive or negative. You can't live in cowardice. Some people are just so scared. And they do that, and people lean on different ways to get around that. They never grow up. Sometimes people will even lean on their sheikh, right? So they have a sheikh, and they say, we can't make any decision until we ask our sheikh. The job of a sheikh is not to tell you what car, should you get a Honda or should you get a Toyota. It's absolutely has nothing to do with, what does that have to do with deen? But if you go back home, you see these murshids, they say, nahi, shadi nahi kar sakte, pehle murshid se puchhe, right? We need to go and ask our murshid. And it's actually an abdication of agency because it's laziness and it's also cowardice. Right? They just don't want to think for themselves. One thing is going to ask them because you want to know what the better thing to do is in the deen, or you want to make mashawara, all of those are good intentions. But when it becomes sort of a cult of personality, then it goes out of the realm of something which is positive to something which becomes negative. And there's terrible happen overseas because of that, because then they exert power and they defraud individuals and all these other terrible things.
So what is the treatment for this? The treatment is to ignore, right? Ignore these restraints and plow through it. If you feel something's happening, I'll give you a very simple example. Forget about this is something I think everyone can relate to. Something's happening and you get a bad feeling, right? You're like, I don't think I should go to masjid, right? Or I don't think we should have the party tomorrow. I just have a bad feeling. It's out of nowhere, no basis, nothing like that. Now I'll tell you, if it stops you from doing something good, then yes, that's not okay. There is something though called intuition. I'm not saying that there's no place for intuition. And one of the scholars, he actually mentioned that that's also a type of firasa, right? That sometimes you have an inkling and your heart doesn't feel well, but this happens ahyanan, right? This happens on occasion. Then you can sort of follow out on that because maybe your heart is telling you something, but don't make a habit of that. That's not how we live our normal life, right? We should live like very normal people. That, I'm a normal human being, I go and make normal decisions, I just follow the normal Quran and Sunnah, I'm not receiving some special revelation from God, there's not angels coming and talking to me and telling me what to do. If it is, it's more likely a hallucination than a real angel, right? You might need to see a psychiatrist rather than go to the Sheikh, but because people really feel that way, and it leads people astray. The proof of it is on the bottom shelf of the middle row of my bookshelves. There's a book from 10 great Muslims. Right? Someone mailed this to my house. 10 great Muslims, and it's really sneaky because this guy was a Muslim and he became murtad. He left Islam. He's an ex-Muslim, and he talks about the journey that 10 people took to leave Islam, and so they were great Muslims because they left Islam. And he starts the story by himself. And you know how he left Islam? So he had all these issues, and then he was going to church, and he was in church, and he saw this figure of light, right, that came before him, and it was 6 feet tall, and he's like, Jesus, or I don't know what he was thinking, and he said, this was the sign that this is the truth. And now it's such a deeply conviction in his heart because he saw a miracle, right? I'm like thinking, bro, if you were here, I tell you, my son is taller than your God, but like, what are you worshiping? But people are like, these things happen, and then they ascribe over importance to them, and then they go off the deep end. So one thing is to plow through it. That's basically the main point to be made about that. Then I'm going to save Riyah for tomorrow because that's like a big one. Let's do another small one. A small one is very short, and we'll just end with this. It's relying on individuals other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being dependent on individuals. So this is actually a disease. The same way as having tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a lofty characteristic. Depending on creation is actually a problem. It's a disease. It's not something which is just okay. It's something that actually needs treatment. And what happens is, this happens in the rise of individuals when they fixate on mortals and they fixate on material needs. And they see those things as agents that have independent power. If you ask on a Aqidah perspective, no one would say that, right? Do you ever think that, the cell phone has some inherent power in itself? No, you say, what's more powerful, your iPhone or Allah? Then, no, obviously Allah is more powerful. But so you can say that our mind says something, but in action we behave differently. Right? So you get sick, the first thing that we do is not make dua. We go to the doctor first. We sprung a leak in our house. The first thing that we do is not go to Allah. We go to the plumber first. And the Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah, this is one of his instructions, that something happens, like people go to dua as like it's not plan B, it's not plan C, it's X, D, E, F, it's like plan Z. Like everything is done, I have nothing left, let me make dua. Right? Because I don't know how I'm going to get out of the situation. That's not the way to do it. The way you do it is every time you're confronted with some type of adversity, you start with dua, then you take the means, and then you end with it. Right? So everything is, the beginning is Allah and the end is Allah. And in between you're also supposed to take the means. It is not real
to just sit
right? Yeah, He will provide for you, but then go and pick it up. You have to do your job. Right? What do you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do? Send an angel to pick up the morsel of food and put it in your mouth? It doesn't work like that. Right? You have to make effort. And this is what we call the Sunnah of Allah. People know about the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has a Sunnah that He has created with You're not going to find any change to the Sunnah of Allah, and that's the rules of cause and effect that exist within the world. Right? If you do X, then Y happens. If you do Y, then Z happens. Those are the rules. You got to play by the rules. In exceptional circumstances, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove the connection between those, the sabab and the outcome, right? The hukum. Just to prove that there's not inherent, it's not a truism by itself that is 100%. That in actuality, just to remind us that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's really qadir and He's the one who actually does everything. That's just to remind us. But in general, you just follow the rules. For example, there's a speed limit, and there's speed limits in the roads. You just follow the speed limit. So the Sunnah of Allah are the speed limits He put on the streets of life, on the journey of life, and that's what we're supposed to follow. Now, one of our teachers, Mullah Choksi, he also explained this idea of tawakkul in a very beautiful way, because people get confused about it. They're like, okay, how do I have more reliance on Allah? And what having reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what it really mean in essence? It means that you don't have any faith that what your efforts are going to produce an outcome. Your faith is only in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true being that produces any outcome. It has nothing to do with whether you make effort or not. It's just that you're doing the effort because that's what you're supposed to do, that's what you're instructed to do. But the one, like for example, you're supposed to drive 35 miles per hour. You're driving 35 miles per hour, that's your job. To make the car go, for all the wheels to work, for the car not to blow up. All of that is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hand. Right? So you could push the pedal, doesn't mean the car's going to go. It's only going to move if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. If He doesn't want, the car's not going to move. So he would tell us that reality of tawakkul is that you should make such effort that as if nothing was going to happen except from your effort. Meaning that you did everything from your side that you could do. Like you have the MCAT, coming up in 2 months. You should Sheikh Hussaini, he would say study and study until you can study no more, and then when you're done, study some more. Right? So you have to really push yourself until you can show Allah that, Ya Allah, what was in my hands I did. Khalas. Right? I'm done from my side. And then he said, after you're done with that, then make dua as if nothing is going to happen except through your dua. Right? You're just completely, like you say that all those efforts, I only did that, Ya Allah, because I was supposed to, but those efforts are not going to bring the results. Only your tawfiq, your fazl, your decision, your mashiach, that's what's going to bring the results. And that's the reality of tawakkul. And when a person begins to do that, then they turn their attention from the asbab to what we call musabbibul asbab. We turn our attention away from the means to the one who is actually the one who created the means. Right? The means themselves are not agents in and of themselves. And the reason people start relying on things other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and people actually do, if you're afraid that if you do X, Y, and Z that your boss will take your job away, Your boss is not the one who gives you the job. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the job. Right? If you feel that you do such and such thing, that you're going to lose all your money, it's not you who are making the money or losing the money. Allah, if He wants to give it to you, then you'll have it. And if He doesn't want to give it to you, you won't have it. The problem is that when people cut Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the picture entirely, because they're not thinking about Him, they're not interacting with Him, He's so out of sight, out of mind. And this is the problem. Out of sight, out of mind. So He doesn't factor into the equation in our normal life. Everything that's happening in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is behind all things. Right? وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. You can't even wish something if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want it. Nothing in this world moves without the will of Allah. He is what we call fa'il haqiqi. And actually, along the spiritual path, this one particular lesson that particularly focuses on this aspect, that to create the reality in the individual that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the real doer. That our efforts are nothing. Our efforts are nothing. This is like a tablighi refrain, right? But it's true. There's a reality behind it that our efforts are nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happens. Everything happens with the will of Allah. And I'll give you one example that I remember in the interaction between me and my teacher. I was talking to my sheikh, I think about one of the kids, I don't know, doing hifz and it not going well, and some type of frustration or some type of challenge. And his reply to me was, he didn't say like, no, you should do X, Y, Z. He's like, you need to do more muraqabah. I was like, what? He's like, you need to do some more muraqabah. He says, Allah is fa'ali haqiqi. And it took me a while to process what he meant by that. Meaning that if things are not going your way, what's wrong with you that you're getting frustrated or you're not happy with that? The only thing that's happening is what Allah wants. And if that's what Allah wants, be happy with it. Right? If you're knocking on a certain door and it's not opening, maybe you're not supposed to be at that door. Right? Don't get fixated on that one particular thing. And they say that sometimes the doors are closed so that you can lead you to the one that's open. And that's the one you're supposed to enter to. So you have to be able to see that. So how does one fix this dependence on relying on individuals other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is that a person should increase themselves in dua, in munajat. The Prophet ﷺ, he taught us that we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything. Hatta shirakana alayhi, even the strap of your sandal. Something so insignificant. Because we can't get anything without Allah. The more that you ask and the more that you show your faqr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this dependence on everything else gets removed from a person. And the person will see that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tawfiq, to rely on none other than Him. Alhamdulillah.